Welcome to Gen AI Pulse, your daily tech update. Today, we are analyzing the recently announced multi-year collaboration that is really setting the foundation for the next generation of Apple's operating system. We're talking about a deal that places Google's Gemini models right at the core of Apple's future, which includes the huge upgrade to Siri as part of Apple Intelligence.
And this partnership is, without question, one of the most consequential strategic moves by either of these companies in a decade. It's an arrangement that, sure, it provides instant technical capability, but it also forces us to ask a really fundamental question. Does Apple's decision to outsource its core AI to its biggest rival, Google, represent a necessary, even savvy strategic pivot to get ahead in the AI race? Or is it a fundamental compromise of its core identity? An identity that has always been defined by proprietary vertical integration.
And I'll be making the case that this is a pragmatic, user-focused, and, a strategically brilliant choice. It's an acceleration strategy. It lets Apple immediately compete at the frontier level while, and this is key, maintaining its incredibly strict standards for user privacy.
And I'm going to argue that this deep, multi-year reliance on a major competitor, it signifies an uncomfortable truth, a failure in their internal AI development that in the long term risks eroding Apple's historical competitive advantage and, I think, dramatically increases both dependency and regulatory risk.
Well, let's start with my position, the strategic necessity of it all. The joint announcement was very carefully worded. It emphasized that this deal followed a careful evaluation. Apple determined explicitly that Google's Gemini tech provides the, and I'm quoting here, most capable foundation for its ambitions right now. And the immediate value for the customer is just undeniable. This partnership promises a more personalized Siri that finally turns the assistant into what everyone has been demanding, a true AI answer engine.
That capability, though, comes at a very steep cost to control. This move is a profound, I would even say philosophical, departure from Apple's DNA. For decades, Apple's entire edge came from its rigid vertical integration, the whole philosophy of owning every layer of its technology, right, from the silicon chips up through the OS. So by outsourcing the foundational intelligence layer, the very cognitive engine of its future, Apple is, as one IDC analyst put it, effectively admitting that its internal efforts simply couldn't compete with Google's Gemini, not in terms of raw capability and scale, at least not in the short term.
But that analysis fixates on the internal process. It doesn't really acknowledge the harsh economic realities of frontier AI. I mean, after the 2022 explosion of generative AI, rivals poured hundreds of billions into developing and training these enormous models. Apple was, let's be honest, late to that specific infrastructure race. So this partnership is the wise, pragmatic solution. You leverage best-in-class technology immediately to satisfy a critical user demand rather than waiting 3, 4, maybe 5 years to try and replicate Google's massive infrastructure internally.
Pragmatism, in this case, looks an awful lot like strategic debt. This creates a really significant dependency on Google, a direct rival. We should probably remember that just last week, Google briefly surpassed Apple in market cap, hitting nearly $4 trillion. That's a clear signal of their accelerating AI agenda. So you're basically handing your rival core strategic leverage. And beyond that, this deal instantly raises serious regulatory red flags because of the long, controversial history between these two, specifically that illegal internet search monopoly that was just proven to be bolstered by default search agreements with Apple.
I see why you think that this compromises their control, but let's just dig a little deeper into the economics here, into the trade-off. This isn't abandonment, it's optimization. Specifically, it's CapEx optimization. The cost to acquire the GPU clusters, build the data centers, and hire the elite researchers needed to train a Gemini-level model from scratch is prohibitive. I mean, even for Apple. By licensing this capability, Apple shifts a multi-billion-dollar capital expenditure, a CapEx burden, into an operational expenditure, OpEx. That frees up capital to focus its internal teams on the unique, differentiating features of Apple Intelligence, the on-device stuff, the photo searching, the notification summarizing, that really require that proprietary integration.
You're framing a failure to innovate as a sophisticated OpEx strategy.
The complexity of AI doesn't justify outsourcing the very foundation of your product roadmap, especially when that foundation is built by a competitor whose economic motives are, fundamentally opposed to yours. While you talk about optimization, I see strategic vulnerability. When Apple was delayed in its AI upgrade, a delay that brought a lot of scrutiny, it showed a structural weakness. Relying on Gemini doesn't fix that weakness. It just masks it. It introduces a reliance on someone else's model.
But that reliance is mitigated by the structure of the deal. It's confirmed to be non-exclusive. Apple is also partnering with OpenAI for certain highly complex queries. This shows Apple is not structurally locked into Google. It's securing the best foundational capability available now, the raw intelligence backbone, while continuing its own development on the proprietary application layer. The real question is, what's the long-term cost of pure vertical integration in this new world? If the delay means you miss an entire generation of user engagement, that cost far outweighs the symbolic purity of owning the whole stack.
I just don't buy that the architecture is truly hybrid when the cognitive core, the brain, is external. Think about the long-term risk of divergence. Google is going to optimize Gemini to prioritize its own ecosystem, Android, Google Search, its cloud services. Over time, those optimizations will inevitably create a slow burn, incompatibility, or at least suboptimal performance for Apple Intelligence features, which are based on a model Apple has no ultimate design control over. When Google updates Gemini, Apple is forced to adapt. It relinquishes its ability to prioritize iOS-specific performance.
Okay, but that critique of dependency brings us right to the privacy question and the potential impact on user trust. Apple has been rigorous, absolutely rigorous, in stating that it will maintain its industry-leading privacy standards. The Gemini models will run using Apple's own proprietary execution framework, leveraging Apple devices and the secure architecture of its private cloud compute. That system is the firewall that maintains user trust, regardless of where the model came from. The data processing stays strictly within Apple's managed security domain.
I'm highly skeptical that the execution environment alone can compensate for the foundational origin. The foundational layer is the most critical element. It defines the biases, the training data, the intrinsic capabilities of the entire system. So while Apple manages the data execution in the moment, sure, the intelligence itself comes from a company that has faced, and rightly so, intense regulatory scrutiny over its market power and its historical data practices, specifically how it acquires and monetizes user information.
Right, but that feels like an unfair generalization of Google's past practices, which were largely focused on ad targeting and search. When we talk about private cloud compute, we're talking about a specific technical innovation. The architecture ensures that data sent for processing is encrypted, and only the output comes back to the user. There's no ability for Apple, or the model provider, Google in this case, to inspect or retain the queries. It's in a tested environment where cryptographic proof of privacy is verified on the fly. So the source of the model doesn't really matter if the execution environment is fundamentally zero knowledge.
Well, that assumes perfect isolation. My question is, does private cloud compute impose a practical restriction on Gemini's performance? Is Apple running a scaled-down, less complex version of the model just so it fits within their proprietary silicon and their PCC constraints? Because if so, Apple is paying for a capable foundation, but only getting a throttled version of it simply to maintain the appearance of control. That isn't best-in-class capability. That's capability constrained by strategic necessity.
The fact is, Apple is leveraging the model for the most complex queries that just can't be handled on device. The seamless user experience is the priority. Apple clearly stated the model selection was based on capability. The challenge of integrating frontier models into a private system is precisely why licensing was required in the first place. To suggest the intelligence is inherently compromised because of its origin just ignores the cryptographic and structural guarantees of PCC. Apple is delivering Google's best intelligence, but within an Apple-built privacy architecture. That, to me, is innovation.
Okay, let's shift focus entirely to the external environment then, because the regulator's view on this is absolutely critical. The Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA in the UK, has already designated both Apple and Google as holding an effective duopoly in certain mobile markets. We can't separate this new AI deal from the history of their previous agreements, which involved billions of dollars and huge antitrust concerns. The fact that they're now deepening their collaboration on the foundational technology for all future computing is, well, it's highly provocative.
That's an interesting point about the CMA, but we have to distinguish between past antitrust actions about market manipulation, like setting Google as the default search engine, and this new arrangement, which is primarily a technology licensing deal for capability.
Sorry, but I just don't buy that the distinction is clear enough for regulators. The timing here is highly suspicious. This multi-year deal comes right after a U.S. judge ruled in August 2024 that Google acted illegally to maintain a search monopoly, a monopoly that was explicitly bolstered by billions paid to Apple. So this new AI deal, even if it's technically different, strengthens the connection between two firms already flagged as having strategic market status. This isn't just a license. It's a codependent relationship that critics will argue further entrenches that duopoly.
While the history is relevant, we have to look at the future legal environment. I would frame the regulatory risk differently. If you look at the remedies phase of that U.S. lawsuit, the court's ruling in late 2025 specifically allowed Google to continue making deals just like this, provided they terminate within a year, unless specified otherwise. The regulatory landscape, while scrutinized, seems pragmatic enough to allow for non-exclusive licensing that's necessary for technological progress.
Pragmatic? Maybe, but not without massive risk. I mean, what about future regulatory penalties? If this deal gets successfully challenged on the basis that it solidifies the technology duopoly, the fines could dwarf anything we've seen before. Apple is putting its balance sheet at risk here for the sake of speed. The alternative wasn't worse. The alternative was to invest heavily in internal capacity to maintain control and superiority. That is what Apple's identity is built on.
But the alternative, a slow entry into the AI market, is strategically suicidal. Apple users are demanding these advanced AI features. Rivals like Samsung, powered by Google, are rapidly gaining adoption. If Apple fails to deliver a true AI answer engine quickly, the damage to its market relevance and user satisfaction would far outweigh the risk of regulatory scrutiny over a non-exclusive license. This deal is dictated by market necessity, not some internal failure. It ensures Apple stays a leader in the fastest-moving tech curve in history.
Market necessity driven by an internal failure to build it themselves. That's the core tension we keep coming back to. You're defending a move to save face and gain immediate capability by sacrificing the defining characteristic of the company, proprietary control over the entire stack. When you rely on a competitor for the cognitive engine of your OS, you fundamentally redefine Apple's competitive advantage away from control and towards simple integration.
I maintain this is a sophisticated evolution of the company, not a compromise of its identity. Apple is still delivering the proprietary user experience, the privacy framework, and the deep device integration that defines its products. The partnership is a rational, pragmatic decision. By selecting Google's Gemini as the most capable foundation, Apple ensures a rapid, high-quality Siri upgrade that users have demanded for years, while strictly adhering to its commitment to data privacy via private cloud compute. It's a necessary acceleration strategy, nothing more.
And I'll end by saying that while it provides necessary short-term capability, this move confirms Apple's lag in the AI race and creates significant long-term vulnerabilities. It is a clear deviation from the vertical integration that defined Apple's dominance. The risks are profound: dependency on a rival and worsening antitrust scrutiny. So the high stakes for Apple's future are crystallized in this one question: is immediate capability truly worth the long-term cost of relinquishing core control?
We have really only scratched the surface of the strategic, economic, and regulatory implications of this landmark collaboration here on Gen AI Pulse.
We hope this discussion has illuminated some of the complexities underlying this very significant partnership. We'll be tracking this as it develops.